My daughter looked at me the way you look at an old piece of furniture you are trying to figure out how to throw away. She was standing in the doorway of the funeral home with her husband just behind her shoulder, and she smiled the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Dad," she said, "we already handled everything. You didn't need to come." She said it quietly enough that the other guests couldn't hear, but loud enough that I could. I had driven 4 hours to bury my wife of 31 years, and my own daughter was telling me I hadn't needed to bother. My name is Robert Callahan. I am 64 years old, and I spent 37 years building things with my hands. Bridges, mostly. A few highway overpasses. One small dam out in eastern Oregon that still holds back a reservoir the size of a small town. I know how structures work. I know that the part you cannot see, the part buried deep in the ground, is the part that holds everything up. My wife Eleanor understood that about me. She understood it better than anyone, which is why what happened in the weeks after her funeral didn't surprise her at all. She had planned for it. She just hadn't told me yet. Eleanor and I separated 8 years ago. It wasn't because we stopped loving each other. It was because our daughter had been living with us, and Eleanor had discovered that she had been quietly draining the household accounts. Not stealing exactly. More like borrowing in ways that never involved asking. Eleanor confronted her, and our daughter told her to choose. Her or me. Eleanor refused to choose. So our daughter made the choice for her by moving out and taking her husband with her. And from that day on, Eleanor and I existed in a kind of suspended state. We lived in different houses. We filed separate taxes. But every Thursday evening, without fail, she drove to my apartment on the east side of town, and we ate dinner at my kitchen table, and she told me about her week, and I told her about mine. Eleanor had built a small empire after I retired. Nothing glamorous. 3 family-style restaurants called the Copper Spoon. She had started the first one 20 years ago, with money we had saved together, and it had grown. By the time she got sick, the Copper Spoon employed nearly 90 people and cleared a comfortable profit every year. My daughter had no interest in the business when it was small. When it became worth something, her interest grew considerably. The funeral was on a Tuesday. My daughter had organized everything without consulting me, which I accepted because grief makes people do strange things, and I was choosing my battles carefully. The flowers were wrong. Eleanor hated lilies. She always said they smelled like a hospital. The room was full of lilies. I didn't say a word. I sat in the 3rd row because the front 2 were reserved, and my son-in-law had printed little cards for each seat that said family only, and apparently the definition of family had been revised without my knowledge. After the service, people came to speak to me. Old friends, neighbors, a few of Eleanor's employees who recognized me from the Thursday dinners I used to bring to the restaurant. One of them, a woman who had managed the original location for 15 years, pressed my hand between both of hers and said, "She talked about you every single day, Mr. Callahan. Every single day." I thanked her. I held it together until she walked away. My daughter found me by the coat rack near the exit. She was carrying a manila envelope, and she held it out to me the way you hand someone a parking ticket. "You'll want to read this," she said. "It's from our attorney. Just formalities." I opened it in the car. It was a formal letter notifying me that Eleanor's estate, including full ownership of the Copper Spoon restaurants, had passed entirely to my daughter as the sole named beneficiary of the will. The letter also noted that as the new owner, she intended to sell all 3 locations to a regional restaurant group within 60 days, and that any personal items I believed belonged to me would need to be claimed and removed from the restaurant premises before the sale closed. I read it twice. Then I folded it and put it in my glove compartment. Then I drove to a gas station 2 miles away and sat in the parking lot for a long time, watching the traffic move on the highway overpass visible from where I had stopped. I had built that overpass. I had done the foundation calculations myself. 22 years later, it was still holding up traffic just fine. I thought about foundations. I thought about Eleanor. I started the car and drove home. I called a man named Gerald Webb the next morning. Gerald had been Eleanor's attorney for 12 years. Not the attorney named in the letter my daughter had given me. Gerald was someone else entirely. He had an office above a dry cleaning shop on Millbrook Avenue, and he wore the same brown corduroy jacket every time I had ever seen him, and he was the sharpest legal mind I had encountered in 40 years of contract negotiations. "Robert," he said, when I explained the situation, "I was wondering when you'd call." He asked me if I had ever heard Eleanor mention something called the Millbrook Holding Group. I told him I hadn't. "Good," he said. "That means she did it right. Come see me this afternoon." I drove to Gerald's office and sat across from his paper-covered desk, and he told me the story my wife had written but never had the chance to read to me out loud. 6 years ago, when Eleanor's second restaurant was turning a consistent profit and she had started thinking about the third, she had visited Gerald and asked him a specific question. If something happened to her, was there a way to ensure that the business would not be used by people she didn't trust? Gerald had explained the mechanics of a holding company, a parent entity that owns the operating businesses. He had helped her create Millbrook Holding Group, a private company registered in the state. The 3 Copper Spoon restaurants were subsidiaries of Millbrook, the will my daughter held, the one her attorney had prepared, and Eleanor had signed 6 years ago when their relationship was still civil, bequeathed to my daughter all assets listed in Eleanor's personal estate. The restaurants were not listed. They never had been. They belonged to Millbrook. And Millbrook, Gerald said, sliding a document across the desk toward me, had 2 shareholders. Eleanor had held 49%. I held 51%. I looked at the document. My name was on it. My signature was on it, notarized and dated 5 years ago. I had no memory of signing it. Gerald watched my face. "She brought you a stack of documents one evening," he said quietly, "during one of your Thursday dinners. She told you they were refinancing papers for her lease agreements. Do you remember?" I thought about it. I remembered a Thursday evening, a stack of papers, Eleanor pointing to lines, me trusting her completely. "She wasn't dishonest with you," Gerald said carefully. "She just knew that if she explained what she was actually doing, you would have refused to take it. You would have said it was her business and her money and her future. You would have said you didn't want it. She knew you, Robert." I sat there for a long time. Gerald let me. "So, the restaurants," I finally said. "My daughter cannot sell them." Gerald shook his head. "She doesn't own them. She never did. She owns Eleanor's personal savings account, her car, her furniture, and a small brokerage account. The combined value is somewhere around $40,000. I thought about the regional restaurant group. I thought about the 90 employees. I thought about the woman at the funeral who had pressed my hands. "What do I do next?" I asked. Gerald opened his laptop. "That," he said, "is entirely up to you." My daughter called me that Friday evening. I was eating a sandwich at my kitchen table when the phone rang. I had been expecting the call for 2 days, which told me Gerald had already sent his notification letter and it had arrived. "Dad," her voice was different than it had been at the funeral, less smooth. "Dad, I need you to explain what is going on. My attorney says there's some kind of holding company. He says the restaurants aren't in the will." I told her that was correct. She was quiet for a moment. "Well, what does that mean for us?" I noticed the us. It was always us when something was wanted. "It means I own the controlling interest in the business your mother built," I said. I kept my voice calm. "What do you mean, controlling interest? You were separated. You weren't even part of her life." I didn't respond to that. I was part of her life every single Thursday for 8 years. But this wasn't the moment for that conversation. "My attorney will be in touch," I said. "Don't do anything with those properties until you hear from Gerald Webb." She didn't wait to hear from Gerald Webb. That weekend, I was informed by the manager of the original Copper Spoon location that my daughter and her husband had arrived Saturday morning and announced they were the new owners and would be reviewing all staffing decisions. The manager, the same woman who had held my hands at the funeral, called me from the parking lot because she didn't feel comfortable speaking inside. She told me my son-in-law had walked into the kitchen and told 2 of the cooks they were being let go to reduce overhead before the sale. She was shaking when she told me this. Those 2 cooks had worked at that restaurant for 9 years. I drove there the same afternoon. I walked in during the lunch rush. My daughter was seated at the counter with her husband, reviewing what appeared to be the sales contract from the restaurant group. She looked up when I came through the door, and her expression did not suggest she was glad to see me. "Dad, you can't just show up here." I pulled out a chair and sat down across from them. I placed a copy of the Millbrook Holding Group registration on the table between us. My son-in-law picked it up. He had a law degree from a mid-tier school, and he often acted like this, gave him authority in situations where it did not. He scanned the document. His jaw tightened. "This is going to be contested," he said. "Absolutely contested." I nodded. "That's your right," I said. "But until a court orders otherwise, those two employees are reinstated as of Monday morning, and no sale agreement is executed without my signature as majority shareholder." My daughter stared at me. "You can't do this. This was Mom's business. You were never part of it." I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about all the Thursday evenings I had packed up leftover food from my refrigerator to bring to the restaurant because Eleanor worked late and forgot to eat. I thought about the supplier contracts I had reviewed at her kitchen table when she was first starting out and didn't know the difference between a fixed-rate agreement and an open-ended one. "I was more part of it than you know," I said. I stood up. "Gerald's number is at the bottom of that document. Have your attorney call him." The legal challenge came quickly. My son-in-law's approach was straightforward. He filed a claim arguing that the Millbrook Holding Group had been created as a mechanism to defraud Eleanor's rightful heirs, that my presence as majority shareholder was the result of elder financial manipulation, and that the document I had signed had been obtained through deception. It was well constructed. It painted a picture of a bitter, estranged husband who had manipulated a sick woman in the final years of her life. The filing included a declaration from a family acquaintance who stated he had personally heard Eleanor express regret about her marriage and her wish that I would simply move on. I read it in Gerald's office and felt a kind of cold, clean clarity. This was the structure they had built, and I was a civil engineer. I knew exactly how to find the load-bearing flaw. The flaw was that Eleanor had not been manipulated. Eleanor had been meticulous. She had left evidence with the patience of a woman who had always known her daughter well. Gerald showed me the second envelope. Not from a safe, not from a hidden compartment, from his own filing cabinet, where it had sat sealed for 4 years with my name written across the front in Eleanor's handwriting. I recognized the pen she always used. A fine-tipped black rollerball she ordered in boxes of 12 because she went through them so quickly. I opened it at Gerald's desk. There were 2 items inside. The first was a handwritten letter. The second was a small USB drive. The letter was dated 4 years earlier. Eleanor had written it during what she described as a good week, when the medication was working and her thoughts were clear. She explained the holding company. She explained the Thursday evenings. She explained, with the straightforward precision that had always been one of the things I loved most about her, that she had not hidden the arrangement from me out of dishonesty, but out of what she described as necessary kindness. She wrote, "You would have handed it back. You always hand things back. You spent 37 years building things that held other people up, and you never once thought about what held you up. So I decided to be the foundation you didn't know you had. I'm sorry I didn't tell you. I knew you'd worry." I stopped reading for a moment. Gerald looked at his desk. He was kind enough not to say anything. The second paragraph addressed my daughter directly, as if Eleanor had known the letter would eventually be read in a setting like this one. "If you are challenging this arrangement," she wrote, "then you have confirmed the reason I created it. I love you. I will always love you. But I watched you spend 8 years treating your father like a liability and treating my business like an asset you were owed. The Copper Spoon was built with money Robert and I saved together, with advice he gave me freely, and with belief he offered me when I had none in myself. His name belongs on it. I put it there. That is not manipulation. That is an overdue correction." I folded the letter. I looked at the USB drive. "What's on it?" I asked Gerald. He said he didn't know. He had an instruction written on a sticky note attached to the drive. The instruction said to open it only if the holding company was legally challenged. I plugged it into Gerald's laptop. It was a video. Eleanor was sitting at the table in her apartment. She looked thin. She was wearing the blue cardigan she wore when she was cold. She looked directly at the camera with the same expression she used in board meetings, the expression that said she had already thought of every objection you were about to raise and had prepared accordingly. She stated the date. She stated her full name. She stated that she was of sound mind and was creating this record voluntarily for the purpose of documenting the history and intent of Millbrook Holding Group. For the next 11 minutes, she explained every decision she had made with the clarity and specificity of a woman who had spent her career signing contracts. She named the attorney present during each signing. She referenced the bank records and correspondence that Gerald had already compiled. She looked at the camera at the very end and said, "Robert didn't ask for any of this. He never does. But he built the thing that made this possible. And I am not going to let it be taken from him by people who only appeared when it became worth something." The legal challenge was dropped 6 weeks later. My son-in-law's attorney sent a one-paragraph letter to Gerald indicating that his clients had decided not to pursue the matter further. There was no apology. There was no phone call. I found out through Gerald, who called me on a Wednesday morning while I was replacing a section of weathered deck boards at the back of my apartment building. I thanked him. I finished the deck boards. Then I sat on the steps and let myself feel whatever I was feeling, which was not triumph and was not satisfaction, but was something closer to exhaustion mixed with a particular kind of grief. The restaurants were mine to do something with. I called the manager of the original location, the woman who had held my hands at the funeral. I asked her to gather the 3 managers together and meet me the following Tuesday. I drove to the original Copper Spoon on Tuesday morning and sat at the corner table that Eleanor had always claimed as hers. The 3 managers came in. I told them what had happened. I told them about Millbrook. I told them that the 2 employees who had been let go were reinstated with back pay for the time they had missed. Then, I told them what I was going to do next. I was not a restaurant owner. I did not have the temperament for it or the knowledge, and I was smart enough to know what I didn't know. What I did have was the majority controlling interest in a company that employed 90 people and that bore the name my wife had chosen because copper is durable and a spoon feeds people. I told the 3 managers that I was placing them in a profit-sharing partnership arrangement. Each of them would hold a 10% stake in the operation of their respective location. I would retain the property ownership through Millbrook, which protected the assets, but the people who had actually kept Eleanor's restaurants running were going to have a meaningful share in what they had built. Gerald was drawing up the papers. It would be official within 30 days. They looked at me. The manager from the original location, the woman with the steady hands, started to say something and then stopped herself. She tried again. "Eleanor talked about doing something like this," she said finally. She mentioned it once. About 2 years ago. She said she wanted the people who showed up every day to actually own a piece of what they were showing up for. I nodded. I wasn't surprised. Eleanor had always been about 10 steps ahead of any room she was in. "She just didn't get to finish setting it up," I said. "So I'm finishing it." My daughter called me 3 days after the legal withdrawal letter. I was not expecting the call, but I had told myself I would answer if she called. It was a short conversation. She said she wanted to meet. I told her I would meet her at the original Copper Spoon on Saturday morning because I wanted to be on ground that felt honest, and because I wanted her to have to walk through that door and sit in her mother's restaurant and talk to me there, instead of on neutral territory. She agreed. She came alone. I noticed that. Her husband's absence was its own kind of statement. She sat down across from me and wrapped her hands around a coffee mug, and she looked, for the first time in years, like the child I remembered. The edges had come down. Some of the performance had fallen away. She said, "I thought you were going to take everything." I told her I wasn't. She said, "You would have had every right to." I said that having the right to do something and it being the right thing to do are 2 different calculations, and she half smiled, because it was the kind of thing I used to say when she was young, and she had not heard me say it in a long time. We talked for 2 hours. It was not easy, and it was not complete. 8 years of distance does not disappear over coffee in a restaurant. But she told me something near the end that I have thought about every day since. She said, "I was angry at you for a long time because I thought you let her push you out. I thought you just accepted it and left. and I couldn't understand why someone who loved her would just accept that. I listened. But she didn't push you out, did she? It wasn't a question. She was protecting you, my daughter said. She was always protecting everybody. Her voice broke on the last word, and she pressed her lips together and looked out the window the way her mother used to do when she was trying not to cry in public. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. It was the first time I had touched my daughter in 8 years. She didn't pull away. I didn't give her the restaurants. That would have taught the wrong lesson, and Eleanor would have known better. But I did something that felt right. I set up a scholarship fund through Millbrook in Eleanor's name, and I designated my daughter as one of the 3 people on the selection committee. Not because she had earned it in the way that word usually means, but because Eleanor had believed in second chances even when she was building in protections against them, and I had enough of her wisdom in me to try honoring both things at once. 6 months after Eleanor's funeral, I was standing on the sidewalk outside the original Copper Spoon on the morning they put up the new sign. It was the same name in the same copper lettering, but below it, on a smaller panel that the manager had ordered without telling me in advance as a surprise, it read, "Founded by Eleanor Callahan, carried forward by the people who showed up." I stood there reading it in the early morning cold with my hands in my jacket pockets. A delivery driver walked past and glanced up at the sign and then looked at me standing there. "Good sign," he said, not breaking stride. "Yeah," I said. "It is. I still have the letter. I keep it in the drawer of my kitchen table. Some mornings, before the day starts, when the apartment is quiet and the coffee is still hot, I take it out and read the part that says I was the foundation she didn't know she had. I think that's the thing about foundations. They don't need to be seen to hold things up. They just need to be there, steady and deep, and placed exactly right, doing the work that nobody notices until the day the whole structure depends on it. Eleanor knew that. She knew me better than I knew myself, and she spent 31 years making sure the things we built together were strong enough to outlast any storm that came after, including the ones she knew were coming, including the ones she couldn't stop. She just made sure I was standing in the right place when they arrived. I am 64 years old. I have built bridges that will carry weight for 100 years after I am gone, but the best structure I was ever part of was a 31-year partnership with a woman who kept her own blueprints, worked in her own timeline, and trusted me with the foundation when she could no longer hold it herself. That is the inheritance that no attorney can file against, and no family dispute can touch. It is already built. It is already standing, and every Thursday evening when I eat dinner alone at my kitchen table, I feel the weight of it, solid as poured concrete, holding me exactly where I am supposed to be. If you have ever been written off by people who only showed up when something was worth something, share this. And if you believe that what you build in quiet is always more lasting than what someone else tries to take in a hurry, hit that subscribe button. I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Let's see how far a quiet story travels.